Vlookup is a really important function. In my opinion, it is definitely one of the go-to ones that anyone should know if they're trying to learn Excel. It's very, very useful, and I use it almost daily at my job. So Vlookup, essentially what you're able to do is you're able to find things in different lists. And I know that doesn't really make a ton of sense, but that'll make sense in a minute. First, we're going to go over the syntax of it. So the Vlookup syntax, first you want to tell it what you want it to look for, where you want to look for it, what do you want the formula to return, and do you want it to be an absolute match. Perfect. So right now we have 3 challenges. So the first challenge is we're going to find the address of employee ID 6893866. Now you might be thinking, oh, well, you can just do find, do Control F to open the find window, 6893866, and click enter. Oh, there it is, Jane George. Easy. Yes, you could do that, but there's a much more efficient way, and that's using Vlookup. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to add the employee ID right here, because that'll make it easier to plug into our formula. So 6893866. Cool. So we're going to do the equal sign right here to start the formula. Vlookup. If I press tab, it'll auto start the formula. It'll put the opening parentheses in there for me. So the lookup value right here, that's this number 1. What do you want it to look for? We want the formula to look for this employee ID. So I'll click right there. As you see, we have the dancing ants around this cell. Once I hit a comma to go to the next thing, it'll lock that in. So number 2, where do you want to look for it? We want to look for it over here. And then 3 kind of goes with it as well. What do you want it to return? Oh, no, sorry, scratch that. Where do you want to look for it? Well, we want to look for it right here. We want to look for it in this table. So we're going to highlight this whole table. And notice there's 4 columns that I selected. That'll be important in just a minute. Comma. So we did, what do you want to look for? Where do you want to look for it? What do you want it to return? So right here, we're trying to find the address of this employee. And you can see the address is in 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, and I messed up that. This should say address right here instead of that actual address, but we'll worry about that later. The address is in the 4th column, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to put a 4, because what we want is in the 4th column. And then comma, and this is the absolute match. I have never, ever, 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 ever needed to use true right there. I have always used false for exact match. I've never been in a situation where I want approximate match. To be totally honest, I don't even know why you would want an approximate match. I can't think of a single reason why you would. So, false for exact match. Close parentheses, enter, and we see that 613 Elizabeth Road. All right, let's check that out. We knew earlier that it was Jane George, 613 Elizabeth Road. Perfect. So if you want to see the formula up here again, Vlookup, what do you want it to look for? You want it to look for this employee ID. Where do you want it to look for it? This column. You always have to select that first column. The first column should be what you're, where you want to find the value. And then we drag it all the way over to the 4th column because that's where the address is. And then comma 4 because again, 1, 2, 3, 4 address is in the 4th column. False because we want it to be an exact match. Now if we change this, let's see, I'll just pick one, Clinton Clayton 2717875. This will automatically update to this address right there. So challenge number 2, find the address for Willis. Or find the address for Willis. Before I did the video, I made sure there weren't any duplicates. I got this list from just a random name generator on Google. So I'm going to find the address for Willis. If there were duplicates, the VLOOKUP formula would find the first one. So I'll kind of demonstrate that in a minute. So again, just like what I did with here, up here, I will put Willis right here to make the formula easier to use. Equals VLOOKUP, tab to auto start the formula. Lookup value, so what do we want it to look for? We want it to look for Willis, comma. Where do we want it to look for it? In this case, I probably should have specified here, but this is the first name. And we're trying to find the address. So we're going to highlight this column, and we're trying to find the address. So 1 column, 2 column, 3 column, comma, 3, because the address is in the third column, comma, false, because we want a true an exact match, not an approximate match. Enter. Boom. All right, so let's find Willis right here. 566 North Hall Road. Perfect. So if there were duplicates, like one reason, like when you're doing a VLOOKUP, you generally want something that's not a repeating value. So like the employee ID, if you worked at a company, each employee ID would be unique. They wouldn't have duplicated employee IDs because that would just be dumb. But if there were, so like for example this one, Willis, if we go up here and we change Jane's name to Willis, it'll change this to 613 Elizabeth Road, because the VLOOKUP formula will look for the first instance. So it'll go down here, finds Willis here, so oh, this must be it, 613 Elizabeth Road. It doesn't go far enough to see that there's a second one. So that's one thing you'll have to be aware of with VLOOKUP. And challenge number 3, find the employee ID of the person who lives on 9647 Lake Court. So that address is, let's see if we can find that real quick. Right here. So Gail Arnold. This is the person we wanted to return. Now, this brings us into a predicament because VLOOKUP is only able to look left to right. You can't search in this column and make it go backwards. It can only look left to right. So if you notice in these other two, first we started in this column and looked over, then we started in this column and looked over. We aren't able to look left to right. So in a real world situation, what I would probably do is I would probably just cut this column and insert it right here. Then we could do this, equals VLOOKUP, tab to start the formula. What do we want to look for? This address, comma, it's in this column. Drag it over here because that's where the employee ID is, comma, and we'll do a 2 because 1, 2, it's in the employee ID is in the second column, and comma, false. Enter. What did I do wrong? I don't know, I must have just mistyped that somewhere. But anyway, and then when we click enter, the VLOOKUP formula will reflect the employee ID. So if we look for this here, it's this one. So 35153 837. So it's this one. Perfect. So it worked. Like I said, one of the main drawbacks to VLOOKUP is you can only look left to right. There are a couple other formulas that you could use to look right to left if you wanted to. One of them is index match. That one's a little more complicated. There's a newer one that just came out within the last year, I think. It's called XLOOKUP. So I'm going to make a video on that one too, so you can go ahead and watch that one as well. Also, one thing to note is since we changed these, if you notice this changed too, because now this one, it can't look, it's not there anymore because we moved the column over here, and so now it returns an error.